Radical Red is one of the hardest Romhacks out there, and I want to know if it's beatable using only dragons. After all, dragon is one of the best types in the game. Well, that might be true when playing competitive, where you only use the best fully evolved ones, but the unevolved forms are some of the weakest Pokemon in the game, which isn't great since this is a hardcore Nuzlocke, meaning if any of my dragons should fall, they'll have to dwell in the box forever. In this monotype challenge, I'll be allowed to capture or receive one of each dragon type in the game, regardless of location. And we're of course not allowed to use items from the bag in battle or level past the next boss fight. Normally, there are no dragon type starters, only Charizard's Mega X form, which I won't be allowed to use since it would require me to send a non-dragon into battle before Mega Evolving. That makes my choice easy since there's only one viable option, Trico, which may not be a dragon now, but in this game, Sceptile, much like its Mega Evolution, has been given the dragon type. The first actual dragon we can find is Applin on Route 22. However, this thing's basically worthless until it evolves, meaning we're gonna have to find some other way to even make it past Brock. Our best possible chance is gonna be picking up the random egg in Fuchsia City. The way I'm treating these encounters is the first dragon I hatch is the encounter that I get, and to narrow down my chances to just Cyclizar, Frigibax, and Tatsugiri, I end up picking up the Paldean egg. Frigibax being an ice type would mean we have to move on to attempt 2. However, getting either of the other two gives us a solid chance of beating Brock, especially Tatsugiri, since this little guy comes with some pretty awesome stats for this point in the game. It does still have pretty terrible physical defense, but that special attack stat is certainly something we can work with. There is a part of Diglett Tunnel that we can access and pick up a Trapinch, but since it's not a dragon, we won't be using it until level 35. We're also able to pick up another actual dragon type in Axew in Fuchsia City's grass. This one, unlike Applin, is actually kind of usable with its attack stat of 87. That's literally more than Meganium, like what the fuck? Before we take on Brock, there's a mandatory fight with Falkner. This fight can be pretty scary. However, after we defeat his Rufflet, both of his other Pokemon are special attackers. And with her base 95 special defense, Sashimi easily tanks any incoming hits, allowing us to defeat Falkner. Getting past Brock is a bit more complicated, since his team is built entirely around physical attackers. Much like a Metapod, there's literally only one strategy I can use, since Harden is currently the only thing standing between us and a one-way trip back to Pallet Town. This strategy seems to really confuse Brock's AI, since it makes his Geodude and Onix not do very much damage. After 3 Hardens, he withdraws again, sending in Arkin. This thing is by far the most threatening thing on his team, so having it switch right into its demise is very nice. The rest of his team isn't able to deal very much damage, so we're just hoping to dodge enough crits to take out the rest of his Pokemon. Luckily, no such misfortune befalls us, and we collect our very first gym badge. With Brock defeated, we can find our next dragon deep in Mount Moon. Like most of our dragons, Noibat is pretty unremarkable until it evolves. However, unlike Applin and Axew, it does at least get some pretty decent moves. Now that we've beat Brock, there are some pretty nasty boss fights that we run into before Misty. The first real tricky one is a double battle in Mount Moon. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I had a run on my hands. Some of these fights are absolutely ridiculous, and they might be impossible for dragons to beat this early on. But the MVP of this double battle was definitely Axew with Breaking Swipe. Being able to lower both opponents' attack is what made us pull through in the end. Things did get uncomfortably close, as I almost lost Noibat and Axew, but in the end, we did make it out of the cave unscathed. This means we get access to our next Wonder Egg in Celadon City. Neither Cyclizar or Frigibax are particularly good against Misty, so picking the Wonder Egg is much better, giving us a chance at any dragon at all. Ironically, the first viable encounter I hatch is an Execute, which isn't a dragon. But that's an issue that's easily fixable with a Sunstone that we picked up on Route 3. Normally, Execute evolves with a Leaf Stone, but using a Sunstone instead gets us the Alolan variant, which is a dragon for some reason, as evidenced by its long and very draconic neck, I guess. And you, like me, may mistakenly have the thought that this grass type is gonna make Misty a ton easier. No. 3 out of Misty's 4 Pokemon have ice coverage, and the only one that doesn't has Stab Poison Jab, which also hits Executor super effectively. And the same goes for 60% of our team. The one point in our favor is we do have Yache Berries. Aside from that, our only hope is once again Tatsugiri, since this is the only dragon we have that doesn't implode at the thought of ice. Because Frogadier is faster, I do have to take a full power Ice Punch before setting up a Harden. This means the second Ice Punch unfortunately falls 1 hit point short of activating our Citrus Berry, but at least we get off our second Harden. Having the Citrus Berry activate now mathematically doesn't actually make a difference, and I'm just glad to be above half health as I set up to +3 defense. Unable to flip turn because of my Storm Drain, Misty hard switches into Starmie as I go for Dragon Breath. Conveniently, her best move here is Psyshock, which hits our hardened defense. I then beautifully manage to land a Paralysis with our second Dragon Breath, which activates Starmie's own Citrus Berry. A third Dragon Breath sadly does just too little to take Starmie out, giving it an opportunity to recover. But with Starmie paralyzed, we're at a huge advantage here since we can just wait for the full para and take it out with a second Dragon Breath. Frogadier comes back in and Ice Punches, but at this point we're already at +3, so Ice Punch doesn't do too much damage and we can land a Dragon Breath for almost half. Misty then hard switches again, this time into Clodsire, which does get paralyzed on the switch. I can't go for the super effective Water Pulse because of Clodsire's Water Absorb, and unfortunately Poison Jab gets me poisoned, leaving me at just 3 HP. This means I've got to switch out, which is terrible news. Clodsire goes for a random move Rock Tomb, lowering Axel's speed as he comes in, but because of the paralysis, we still outspeed and lower its attack with a Breaking Swipe. It gets some health back with a Citrus Berry, but at least doesn't get to attack because of full paralysis. A second Breaking Swipe lowers its attack further so that Rock Tomb barely does any damage. Another Breaking Swipe unfortunately doesn't take Clodsire out, but we get the full paralysis and take it out with a fourth one. Unfortunately, there's nothing we can swap into this Floatzel, which sadly means the first death of the run has to be my namesake Axew. This also means that our only chance of winning this fight is for Executor to harvest this Yache Berry, leaving our chance of victory down to a coin flip. Because of the berry, Executor survives the Icy Wind and fires back with a Seed Bomb, taking Floatzel out in 1 hit. It then comes down to this, and Executor does it. With only Misty's Frogadier left, we manage to proc the 50% chance to get back our Yache Berry. This means we'll be able to withstand 1 more quad effective ice hit, but with Frogadier already damaged, that's all we'll need. We actually just barely end up surviving, but the Dragon Hammer is enough to take out Frogadier even with its Eviolite, granting us our second gym badge, meaning our Applin that was previously useless can finally evolve into Diplin.
I figure what's lost is lost.
That's very stoic of you, and I respect you dealing with the circumstances, but there is an 8-foot hole in your house.
Yeah?
Reaching Vermilion, we can hatch the third and final egg into Hoenn All-Star Tropius. Okay, maybe not exactly, but beyond the dragon typing, it's been given a 20 base stat boost to its special attack, making it half decent, giving its instant access to Leaf Storm. In fact, we're gonna put it to use right away against Lieutenant Surge's Pincurchin, which in this game does have an additional water type. Electric terrain boosted stab moves are scary, but we do have 3 grass dragons to quad resist electric. Surge immediately notices we have the KO with Leaf Storm and swaps out into Vikavolt in order to resist it. This thing is by far the biggest threat to our team given the density of grass types we have. With Banana Split's attack dropped, I swap out into Toothless since I really can't afford to lose any other Pokemon. I regret that I didn't give Toothless a Citrus Berry since it would have allowed me to survive another Bug Buzz, but at least I get a crit flinch Air Slash. I figure I won't be as lucky the following turn and almost pick up the KO with a Dragon Pulse before Toothless unfortunately falls. This puts me in a great position since Vikavolt is incredibly slow and we can pick up the KO with Leaf Tornado, sending in Manectric. Manectric has hidden power Grass, meaning it doesn't actually have a super effective move to hit us with. As it Mega Evolves, we do end up getting double Intimidated, which doesn't matter since Banana Split is a special attacker. Its most powerful move ends up being Flame Burst, which barely does anything, and we can fire back with a full power Leaf Storm, taking it down into the yellow. Not wanting to go down to another Leaf Storm despite the special attack drop, he swaps out into Belly Bolt with Volt Switch, and our Leaf Storm predictably doesn't do too much at -2 special attack. Now at -4, we've got to swap out if we want to deal any damage at all, so I send in Granny Smith. We end up getting paralyzed on the switch, which doesn't matter too much since the most powerful move, Parabolic Charge, barely does any damage at all even with a critical hit. It in fact does so little damage we can heal all the health back with a neutral Mega Drain. This eventually lets us pick up an incredibly free KO at almost full health. Pincurchin comes back in to once again set up the electric terrain. I was expecting Hidden Power Ice here, which would deal massive damage to Granny Smith, and I don't even have a Yache Berry to hold. However, oddly, it goes for Volt Switch. This sends in Pawmot, which is another huge threat with Ice Punch. It does have pretty lacking bulk though, allowing us to deal massive damage damage with Mega Drain and get back to full health. I then have no choice but to sacrifice Granny Smith, who somehow survives the Ice Punch at 2 HP. I then get a pretty insignificant amount of health back with a Citrus Berry before Granny Smith pulls through Paralysis and ends up taking out Palmot with Dragon Pulse. Pincurchin comes back again, so this time expecting the KO from Hidden Power Ice, I swap out into Sashimi, who unfortunately has to take an Electric Terrain boosted Volt Switch, straight into Manectric, which is a nightmare for my little fish, so I swap out into Executor. Annoyingly, Surge goes for Volt Switch again to swap right back into Pincurchin, which isn't too big a problem since we can fire off the super effective Seed Bomb, which almost takes it out. Surge then decides to continue with the Degeneracy, going for Volt Switch to send in Manectric again, which promptly swaps itself out straight into another Seed Bomb. With Pincurchin finally defeated, Manectric is Surge's last Pokemon, meaning he ultimately can't Volt Switch out of his fate to be taken out by a Stomping Tantrum. Somehow my Dragons had actually made it through the early game as we collect our 3rd Gym Badge, and we may actually have a run on our hands. We did lose another Pokemon, but I was expecting to lose 2, and the new level cap is about to more than make up for it. With a level cap jump of 10 levels from 34 to 44, we can get a lot of evolution, starting with Granny Smith into Hydrapple. We're then also able to fully evolve our starter at level 36, meaning we somehow have 4 Grass Dragons on the team. But the real kicker was finding out that Vibrava, which normally evolves at 35, evolves at 34, meaning I could have had it for Surge the whole time. However, it also gains its fully evolved form 1 level earlier, meaning we can immediately get Flygon. Then before heading out of Vermilion, I pick up a good rod to start fishing on Route 11. The only encounters we can find are Krabby and the 30% Horsey, which can be fully evolved right away with a Prism Scale.
Pokemon cosplay is dressing up as Pokemon for fun.
Yeah, but why are you doing it all alone in the darkest cave in the world? Before reaching Celadon, we can pick up our next encounter on Route 8, a Drampaw. Then the moment we reach Celadon, we pick up the T as soon as possible to get to Saffron. The reason we need to do this is to pick up a Dream Patch to change Sceptile's ability to Unburden. This is going to turn our little starter into an absolute unit. Unburden doubles our speed if we consume our items, so we're going to try to taunt Erica into making that happen. I start by going for Breaking Swipe to lower Rillaboom's attack, and then Acrobatics as she goes for U-turn. This super effective move activates Spike's weakness policy and Unburden, doubling both our speed and attacking stats before she sends in Meowscarada. This thing is Focus Sashed, which is why I made sure Spike has Dual Chop, which after the +2 attack has just enough power to take Meowscarada out in 1 hit. Or rather 2, I guess. Rillaboom comes in next, which just gets destroyed by the 110 base power acrobatics since we're not holding an item, and the same goes for Mega Venusaur. Meganium is a bit trickier since it does have a Grassy Seed to boost its defense as it comes in. However, this isn't too much of a problem. We aren't able to take Meganium out in 1 hit, however, it doesn't have any rolls to take Spike out with Dazzling Gleam, leaving us at 10 HP. It also strangely has Dazzling Gleam instead of Draining Kiss, which doesn't take advantage of Triage at all, allowing us to take it out with Acrobatics the next turn without fear of priority. Finally, the grassy terrain disappears, but the battle's about to be over as Erica sends in her final Pokemon, which we easily take out with another Dual Chop. But with Erica defeated, we need to prepare for trouble, because we've got a crazy Team Rocket gauntlet ahead of us before we can reach Sabrina. Going into the first fight versus Giovanni, I wasn't too scared since I knew I had a great counter to Earthworm in my Flygon, and Hydrapple, which somehow remains alive after Lieutenant Surge, actually served as a pretty decent counter versus Kangaskhan. The only mon I couldn't play around was Honchkrow, which my team full of 4 grass types has a really difficult time beating. Unfortunately, to get Sceptile in for free, I did have to make a sacrifice. I'm so very sad I've lost Tropius. Whatever will I do now that I've lost my very best and strongest Pokemon? Anyway, now that I've made room for a much better Grass Dragon, I can weaken Honchkrow with a Thunder Punch, then survive Drill Peck with a held Koba Berry, and finish Honchkrow off with a Quick Attack with no fear of Sucker Punch. I then swap to Executor to finish Veluza off with a Leaf Storm, beating Giovanni. Now that we have the Sylph Scope, I acquire the Pokeflute to fight Snorlax before Team Rocket makes our trouble double at Sylphco. The only reason to do this is to steal Snorlax's leftovers with Thief, which I make sure to do to the Snorlax on Route 16 as well. With our new items for extra bulk, it's time to pick up another bulky team member, our 3rd Dragon Water type, Lapras. And this thing is gonna get us out of the aforementioned double trouble. Before facing Giovanni again, we have to face Ariana and Archer together with Brendan. In this fight, Brendan has a very competent team, and most of what we have to do is just protect every other turn to make sure we don't take too much damage and and then let Brendan do most of the heavy lifting as we swap around to resist hits. Not the most interesting of strategies, but we need to preserve our Pokemon. As for Giovanni, this is the first time we face permanent weather, meaning we need a solid strategy, otherwise we're gonna get completely bulldozed. Luckily, we received the answer just before the fight in Lapras, and we can take advantage of the fact that Hippowdon wants to set up Stealth Rock the very first turn to get rid of the sand and set up our rain. With water moves twice as powerful, Scald is enough to one-shot Hippowdon, bringing in the real threat on Giovanni's team, Garchomp. His only dragon move is Scale Shot, a multi-hit move that immediately activates Fairy's weakness policy. Lapras is bulky enough to tank 4 hits, but 5 would take us out, so I'm very happy that this ended up being a 2-hitter. From here, Garchomp is holding a Yache Berry, so even at +2 special attack, an Ice Beam isn't enough to take Garchomp out, which is why we've given Fairy Ice Shard. It felt pretty awesome to beat Garchomp with this strategy, but we all knew Fairy was the answer to Dragon. From here, the fight is pretty straightforward. Against Kangaskhan, we've got our dedicated counter Hydrapple, which can easily put Kangaskhan to sleep with a Yawn Protect combo. This leads Giovanni to swap Kangaskhan out for Torterra, which isn't a great choice since it's also easily walled by Granny Smith's Giga Drain. Excadrill doesn't have Sand Rush, so it's easily defeated by Flygon, and we swap back into our Apple to take care of Garganacl, leaving only Kangaskhan. However, we already did most of the work by putting it to sleep and take it out with a few more Fickle Beams, meaning we not only defeated Giovanni, but we defeated him deathless. This opens up a lot of great encounters for us, but I start by going for Route 12, where we can find a raid den with a Hisuian Sliggoo. With a Dragon Steel type, we have a Pokemon that's not weak to Dragon or Ice. Beyond that, Hisuian Goodra is an insane defensive Pokemon and very welcome on the team. However, by far the biggest encounter jackpot is fittingly at the game corner. In a monotype challenge where we're allowed to get one of each dragon type regardless of its location, this gets us a lot of the pseudo-legendary dragons that we don't already have. I make sure to evolve some before taking on Sabrina, most importantly Salamence and Hydreigon. Unfortunately, with the level cap at 59, Dracloak is one level from fully evolving, meaning we can't use it to absolutely sweep Sabrina. Meaning we'll instead have to come up with actual tactics to take on this insanely tricky double battle. Sabrina is all about speed control, setting up Trick Room to try and outspeed with her slow Pokemon, and also Psychic Surge to boost her psychic moves and remove the ability for you to outspeed with priority moves. I can't let Hatterene set up Trick Room, so I start by going for Shadow Claw, which I knew unfortunately wouldn't get the KO, so I finished the job with a Hyper Voice from Hydreigon, which not only takes Hatterene out, it also boosts her special attack with a Throat Spray. Sadly, Sabrina immediately eliminates the boost by going for Mystical Fire, which lowers her special attack back. Third out is Brute Bonnet, and this is why it's a bit unfortunate that I didn't get the KO and thus a Moxie boost with Drake, since I fall just short of the KO once again. So for a second turn in a row, Hydreigon is on cleanup duty, taking out Brute Bonnet and dealing some more chip damage to Indeedee that this time oddly decides to Mystical Fire Drake. Fourth out is Gardevoir, which we definitely need to remove immediately, but this is where Drake gets his chance to finally pick up a KO and a Moxie boost. Indeedee's actually useful to have on the field, so I make sure to go for Roost with Hydreigon to get a bit of health back, before Indeedee once again targets Drake with Mystical Fire, which is perfect since we don't care about our special attack stat. Ursaluna comes in next, which loves to go for Protect, so I make sure to just Protect with Drake in case it wants to go for an attacking move, and then Roost. With Ursaluna's Protect turn wasted, I can go for a Brick Break, which isn't quite enough to pick up the KO, but Hydreigon finishes the job once again, this time with Dragon Pulse. When I planned this fight, I was expecting either Hyper Voice to hit both of my Pokemon or for Hydreigon to get hit by Mystical Fire, but Drake being the target is absolutely perfect. At this point, Sabrina only has Indeedee and Porygon left, and I'm expecting it to go for Trick Room, but in case it wants to Ice Beam my Salamence, I swapped out into Slowsis. After Hydreigon finally takes out Indeedee, I'm expecting the Ice Beam, so I go into Kingdra, which unfortunately gets Frostbite before Slowsis knocks off Porygon's Eviolite. Frostbite is basically special attacking Burn, so I swap into Fairy as Slowsis ironically gets Frostbite. However, for this battle, I am running a physical set, so it doesn't matter too much, and I end up finishing the flawless fight the following turn with a Body Press from Slowsis and a Scald from Fairy. Getting through this double battle gave me some much needed confidence, because before we can face the next gym leader, we have some rematches to do. With a new level cap of 68, we can finally get our hands on Dragapult, which is an outstanding Pokemon. As I started taking Route 12 towards Fuchsia, it dawned on me that might be a terrible idea since it's permanently hailing. Instead, I decided to take Cycling Road. This means we'll be able to fly back to Fuchsia, but for now, we've got to rematch the gym leaders. Brock is by far the simplest since Sandstorm is something we've effectively dealt with before. Spike tears through his lead Great Tusk with a Leaf Storm, and I can simply swap out into Slowsis against Hisuian Arcanine since we get a gooey drop after Head Smash. This somehow makes the doggo slower than our 10-ton snail, and because of our awesome defensive typing, we don't even have to worry about Flare Blitz taking us out, and another Body Press does the job. Omastar comes in next, but it just gets drained, sending in Aerodactyl. This thing is very scary, but we can pretty easily trick the AI since it can't actually one-shot Slowsis from this amount of health. It therefore always goes for Dragon Dance, and we can take out a bunch of its health with Flash Cannon. +1 is the perfect place for Aerodactyl to be, since this means it sees a KO with Earthquake, so we can safely swap into Big Bug. +1 also means it can't one-shot with Dual Wing Beat, which would otherwise be a huge problem since that bypasses Focus Sash. Against Ursaluna, I can just swap out into Slowsis to resist the Blood Moon, baiting Ursaluna to go for an Earth Power to swap in Spike safely. We then just KO with Leaf Storm, which sends in Tyranitar. With Dragon Dance and Weakness Policy, you really want to be careful around this thing, so I pivot through Granny Smith to put it to sleep with Yawn as I swap into Slowsis. Once asleep, I just Body Pressed away, not caring at all about its Weakness Policy, since I knew I'd outspeed with 2 free Body Presses because of Gooey. This means only Aerodactyl remains, but because Slowsis is at such low health, I can swap in Big Bug on an Earthquake, survive the Dual Wing Beat no matter what, and finish the job with a Dragon Claw. But with Brock defeated Deathless, I had to go up against Misty, and in this rematch, I should theoretically have a much better matchup versus Brock with both Water Absorb and Storm Drain accessible to me. In fact, Executor completely walls Ferrothorn, and I can take it out with a couple of Flamethrowers. In fact, she even managed to take out Mega Gyarados in one hit after it went for Dragon Dance. However, neither Ferrothorn or Gyarados were Pokemon I was particularly worried about. The biggest threat is Archaludon. Archaladon? I've got no idea, but regardless, Dragon Steel is one of the best defensive typings in the game, and it's very difficult for me to crack. In fact, the only way forward I saw was to let Executor go to send in Sashimi for free. To guarantee I survive a crit Dragon Pulse, Sashimi is holding a Focus Sash to make sure we can fire back with Mirror Coat and take Archaludon down to its sturdy. It's sad to see Sashimi go since she's the only reason we got through the early game, but it's a necessary evil. This way we can finish off Archaludon with a Dragon Pulse from Pult, and from here the battle is pretty trivial. We wall Goodra with Kingdra and take it out with a Dragon Pulse. Gorobus gets knocked out by Giga Drain, and against Palafin, I simply swap in Drake and let the Dolphin take itself out with Wave Crash. With Misty defeated, there was only one more rematch to go, and even though I evolved Garchomp for it, he's really just a backup, since in this case, the real Mon for the job is Flygon. The one thing that Flygon has that Garchomp doesn't is Dragon Claw, and since Iron Treads loves to set up Stealth Rock the first turn, we get one set up for free. As we set up the second one, we see the only attacking move Iron Treads can use against us, Stab Ironhead, which does do a decent amount of damage. Because of that, I run Protect and Leftovers to make sure we get as much HP back as possible as we set up our dances. Once at +4, I start Earthquaking, taking Iron Treads down to its sash. After the incoming Ironhead, I am going to have to Protect to get as much HP back as possible since being deep in the red puts us at risk of being Mach Punched by Palmot. This means once Iron Treads goes down, I continue going for Protect every other turn before picking up KOs in order to get more Leftovers recovery. However, Surge doesn't send in Palmot until I've beaten both Bellibolt and Rotom, meaning I've got more than enough health to survive the Mach Punch, granting me easily my most overwhelming victory of the run so far.
That monstrosity there, you want it too, right?
Yes, please.
I've heard they can show up at Route 18.
As for my real preparations for Koga, I make sure to pick up Baxcalibur. Koga is really tricky and doesn't really have a type theme to his Pokemon, it's more of a ninja team. His U-turn, Boomburst, Choice Spec Swallow can be incredibly annoying, so I eliminate it right away with a Dragon Darts from Dragon. Koga then sends in his Choice Scarf Drapion, which always crits with Wicked Blow, so I make sure to swap in Hydreigon to resist it. Because the move always crits, it's actually pretty easy to play around, since I know I'm not going to go down to a random Evo even more powerful crit. After the second one, I go for a super effective Earth Power, which doesn't quite do enough to take Drapion out, but after leftovers, we're guaranteed to survive the next Wicked Blow. I can then simply go for Roost, which recovers back a bit more health than Wicked Blow does. I then do the same thing another time, almost getting Hydreigon back to full health. Quickly realizing he's outmatched here, Koga swaps out into Greninja, which gets hit by Earth Power on the switch. With Hydreigon almost at full health, I can always just swap it back in whenever Drapion comes back. For now, I switch into my dedicated Greninja counter, Frostzilla. Dark Pulse is its most powerful move, so I go for Brick Break, which kind of backfires as he sends in Iron Valiant. I get completely destroyed by close combat here, so I send in Dranma. Sadly, this is her first and only turn of the run, but she does something pretty important. Not only does she enable the free switch to Slow Sis, getting her in at full health, this way we always survive a hit because of Focus Sash, and we can take out Iron Valiant with a Gyro Ball because of the defense drop. Mega Toxtricity only has resisted moves here, but its strongest one is Boom Burst, so we can safely swap in Dragon. 2 hits of Dragon Darts won't quite be enough to take Toxtricity out, but it still only has resisted hits. And while Overdrive has a crazy cool animation, it doesn't do that much to Dragon, and we can simply finish Toxtricity off the next turn. This brings in Axelgor, and here I make an incredibly risky play, risking a crit Bug Buzz in order to KO with Dragon Darts. The whole truth is I thought I'd simply outspeed, so I was very lucky. Drapion comes back next, but we have a dedicated counter for this thing and can easily take it out with an Earth Power after a couple of turns. Finally, we face Greninja, but for this thing, we also have a dedicated counter in Frostzilla, meaning we pick up a pretty clean victory with only 1 death, which honestly I'm pretty happy with since it was against one of the strongest fairy types in the game. Now that Koga's out of here, we finally get access to Surf. With it, we can start surfing south of Pallet Town and pretty easily dodge every single trainer in the way to get to Cinnabar Island without a single battle, meaning we can take on Blaine pretty much immediately, and this is another permanent weather battle. We honestly aren't too worried about the sun since Dragon resists fire. However, we want to try and avoid dealing with stuff like Chlorophyll and Growth getting double boosts in the sun. So I make sure to lead with Fairy once again to set up the rain. After taking Armarouge down to its sash with a rain boosted Surf, I swap out into Dragon. I have to take a Psyshock on the switch, but it's a small price to pay in order to finish off Armarouge with a Dragon Darts the following turn. This understandably sends in Charizard since Blaine would like to set up the sun once again. I wasn't expecting Charizard to come out so soon, but it makes sense since it has Dragon Pulse and it kind of negates all the work that Fairy did. I really don't have a good switch here, so I swap out into Granny Smith, who's just gonna have to take a Dragon Pulse to the face. Unfortunately, my only way to work around this Charizard is to sacrifice another Pokemon, and Granny Smith had kinda done her duty. Charizard Y doesn't get any points of speed when it Mega Evolves, so we can easily outspeed and take it out with a quad-effective Rock Tomb from Garchomp. Chlorophyll Executor is a really big problem in the sun, so I swap out into Hydreigon as it sets up with Growth. Sadly for Executor, it needs to set up a second Growth in order to take Hydreigon out, which is pretty terrible since the sunlight fades, meaning it doesn't outspeed anymore. Knowing this, Blaine swaps out into Slitherwing to take a Dark Pulse, which barely does any damage, so I'm forced to swap out due to the incoming First Impression, which I can resist with Dragon. I end up eating a critical hit here, which I just barely managed to survive before firing back with a quad-effective Acrobatics the following turn to take Slitherwing out. Typhlosion comes in next since its ability gives it priority fire moves. But I can easily just swap in Garchomp to resist a Flamethrower and then take it out with an Earthquake. Ogerpon comes in next since it doesn't take super effective damage from ground, so I swap out into Frostzilla, who immediately gets her Bonberry knocked off, which doesn't really matter since Dragon Pulse on Charizard was the only Dragon move we face. I then risk a crit from Ivy Cudgel, which boosts Frostzilla's attack through Thermal Exchange, thus making Stone Edge an easy one-hit KO and leaving Blaine with only Executor. His only move that can KO me here is Psyshock, so I can safely swap in Hydreigon and just finish it off the next turn with a Dark Pulse for an easy victory. And beating Blaine gives us more perks than just the 7th badge, since showing him Hydreigon gives us a useless Charizard IY, but more importantly, the choice specs. And this gave me a dangerous idea. We now have the choice band and specs, but entering the end game, I'd really like to have a Scarf to go with them. But in order to get it, we have to beat Pryce. Ice is one of our worst matchups in the game, but unfortunately without a Choice Scarf, I don't think we stand a chance against the endgame. This might be a dubious call, but I make all the preparations I might need by evolving Hakamoa into Komoa. Taking on a fully optimized Ice team in a Dragon-type challenge may be the stupidest thing I've ever done. Pryce's Jinx is a big problem, since it can outspeed a lot of my Mons and put them to sleep with Lovely Kiss. I could outspeed and take it out with Dragon Darts, but not with its defense boosted by the snow. Because of that, I've got to lead with Fairy to set up Rain Dance. Because I healed off Sleep with a Lumberry, it's gonna want to go for Lovely Kiss again, so I can't switch straight to Dragapult. My best option is Goodra, since Jinx will want to go for Focus Blast, which we can completely dodge with Dragon's Ghost typing. Now that Dragon sees the kill on Jinx, Pryce wants to swap out, sending in Walrein, so I go for U-turn in order to get the initiative. This way, I don't have to take any unnecessary damage as I swap in Goodra. Pryce, realizing he really can't do anything to Goodra with Walrein, swaps out into Glalie, which means I'm forced to swap out as well. I switch in Fairy, knowing perfectly well that she definitely can't defeat this Glalie. But she's done her job, getting rid of the hail that Pryce can't set up again. It's a steep price to pay, but I hope it's gonna be worth it. Letting Fairy go down gives us a free switch to Dragon, who sees a KO with Dragon Darts, so Pryce swaps out into Fluffy Walrein. The darts pretty much don't do anything, so I U-turn back out into Goodra. I've equipped Slow Sis with the Choice Spec so that we can easily gain back a ton of health with Giga Drain as soon as we wake up. A couple of Giga Drains drop Walrein, sending in Baxcalibur. I swap to Dragon as the Baxcalibur sets up with Dragon Dance, which does unfortunately make it faster. Luckily, I've already accounted for this by not letting Dragon take any damage, surviving with a Focus Sash so that we can send the Dragon Darts for massive damage. Unfortunately, 2 darts aren't enough to take Baxcalibur out, but this doesn't end up being too big a problem since I gave Dragon Sucker Punch for this exact situation. Cloyster comes in next, so I swap to Slow Sis and knock it out with a Giga Drain. This brings in Jinx that once again puts me to sleep and wants to go for Focus Blast so I can safely send in Dragon and this time finally take Jinx out with a 2 Dragon Darts. Arctozolt is next, which is pretty much completely walled by Frostzilla, who can easily take it out with a few Iron Heads. Finally, there's only Glalie left, and as long as Frostzilla doesn't get crit, we can take out Glalie, sealing our victory against Pryce at the cost of only 1 death. But I think it was worth it. At this point, we've officially entered the endgame, and Lapras was a calculated loss. But before we can claim our final gym badge, we have to sort out some final Team Rocket trouble in Cerulean Cave. Here, Giovanni captures Mewtwo, and we team up with Lance, who's really into fighting Team Rocket. Like, possibly a bit too into it, but he is the law. The Giovanni fight is tough, but Lance is very reliable, and we can sit back and watch him do most of the work. The 2 tricks to making it out of this battle alive is number 1, using Protect, and in this case, number 2, using Pokemon we're not too afraid to lose. Multi-battles are extremely chaotic and inconsistent, but this close to the Elite Four, we can afford to be a little bit sloppy with the Pokemon we know we're never gonna bring. This does mean the fight costs me Hydreigon. However, because we can find a suitable replacement for it fairly soon, it's a pretty worthwhile deal to get the KO with Komoa and win the fight. We can even find a replacement right away in Cerulean Cave, Duraludon. This even lets us use one of the newest dragons in the game, our Celadon, which I creatively named Silvergate Bridge because of that one bridge, you know, the big one. My next order of business is to head back to Route 13 to pick up our next encounter, Turtonator, which, together with an Assault Vest we can receive from beating Jasmine, is probably the only dragon in the game that allows me to survive Fleur Cannon with Magearna and take it out without sacrificing a Pokemon. The rest of the fight is pretty straightforward. I bring Silvergate Bridge and Goodra and try to tank as many dragon moves as possible. Outside of Magearna, her most dangerous Pokemon is probably Gouging Fire, which I almost KO with a Dragon Pulse from Silvergate Bridge, meaning it instead ends up taking itself out with Recoil from Claire Blitz, and I just barely survive burn damage. Against Claire's last 2 Pokemon is where we really needed that Choice Scarf to get away without any further deaths. Roaring Moon doesn't have any Dragon-type moves, so it's completely safe to swap in Drake, who with the Choice Scarf we fought so hard to acquire can take out Roaring Moon in 1 hit, and the final remaining Naganadel. With Claire defeated, I get my final gym badge and the TM for Draco Meteor. With the final badge in hand, I get access to Victory Road. But before I'm able to enter, we have one final fight with Brendan. This is one of the fights where I really needed that choice scarf since Deoxys outspeeds Dragon, but with the scarf, we easily outspeed and Dragon Darts takes care of it despite its focus sash. We also just completely wall his Jirachi with Silvergate Bridge, so even though it flinches me about 1 billion times, we're able to pick up the KO and thus the victory eventually. Then once I defeated the game's creator by simply having a ground type with Protect on my team, I checked if Lorelei would have water or ice. And of course, my worst nightmare was realized. If I was to stand a chance against a fully realized ice team, I'd need to make some serious preparations. To start, I made my way back to Victory Road to pick up Roaring Moon. I did tell you there'd be a replacement for Hydreigon. I then went to the deepest room of the Pokemon Mansion to pick up a second Paradox form, Gouging Fire. With these two new recruits, I had my team ready. First is Salamence, the Roaring Moon, which you may notice oddly has a timid nature. As a physical attacker, this is far from the nature that Roaring Moon wants. But without EVs available in the game, it's the only way to make its speed higher than its attack. Our second Pokemon is Entei, the Gouging Fire. This thing is a physically offensive and defensive powerhouse, and with Burning Bulwark to protect and burn any target that tries to hit it physically, it's very powerful. Third is Mega Salamence, which is pretty much an auto-include since it can basically solo Bruno on its own. Fourth is Dragon the Dragapult. Speed is the name of the game, and Dragon has it. To make Cynthia proud, we bring Sharknado the Garchomp. You can never go wrong with this guy. Finally, we've got the Silvergate Bridge, and if we make it to Lance, this thing is pretty much the only thing standing between us and being roared back in time to Pallet Town. Somehow my dragons had made it all the way to the Elite Four. The Lorelei fight in this game is cruel, to put it mildly, and we have to face by far the worst variant for our dragons. Lorelei starts the fight with an Alolan Ninetales to set up the snow, and a crazy dangerous Specs Slush Rush Glaceon. Slush Rush effectively puts Glaceon at base 150 speed, a lot faster than Salamence's base 119, which is why I needed that timid nature, to make sure its speed is faster, so that we get a speed boost from Booster Energy at the very start of the fight. This allows us to set up the Sun, which immediately removes Slush Rush and activates Entei's Photosynthesis, increasing its attack. It also completely negates Ninetales' attempt of going for Aurora Veil and lets Entei move before Glaceon to take it out with a Flame Charge, meaning it now has both boosted speed and attack. Rotom comes in third, but it doesn't have any moves to hit us super effectively, so it's not really a problem. My priority is taking out Ninetales with a quad-effective Iron Head before it can set up Snowscape again. Taking out Rotom here would send in two dangerous Pokemon at once, which is definitely not something I want, so I leave it alive by going for Dragon Dance with Entei. Salamence unfortunately gets paralyzed by Thunderbolt before Baxcalibur comes in, but it's basically done its job at this point. Baxcalibur gets instantly deleted by a Dragon Claw from Entei, and Rotom oddly goes for Thunderbolt again instead of doing something like Thunder Waving Entei. Calyrex comes out next, and this thing is incredibly bulky, which is why I made sure to get those boosts specifically to be able to one-shot it with a Flare Blitz. With Calyrex defeated, I still don't want to take out Rotom, so I just hit it with a soft Iron Head for barely any damage at all before it Thunderbolts Entei, which doesn't end up paralyzing. Last out is Lorelei's Abomasnow, which does set up the snow as soon as it comes in. This does mean Slush Rush will be active as soon as Abomasnow Mega evolves, which is why it was so crucial to KO Glaceon with that Flame Charge and to get that one Dragon Dance in order to outspeed here and take Abomasnow out in one hit. And as it goes down, we only have a Rotom left to fight. This thing not having any ice moves and switching in as the very first Pokemon after Glaceon has single-handedly allowed us to beat this fight. Lorelei admirably tries to hold on, surviving Dragon Claw after a Citrus Berry and even burning Sharknado with a Scald, but ultimately Rotom falls all the same, granting us our first Elite Four victory. Our second fight is versus Bruno, which hopefully should be pretty much free. His lead Great Tusk pretty much can't do anything to Mega Salamence, especially after an Intimidate, so I'm free to start the dance party. The first one is free, as they say, as Bruno wastes a turn setting up Stealth Rock. However, I'm at liberty to set up my second and third, since the only move this thing has to hurt us with is Close Combat, which barely does anything. We then let the carnage begin by going for Dual Wing Beat, which can take out Great Tusk despite its Focus Sash. Urshifu respectably survives the first hit, but the second takes it out. Iron Valiant unfortunately isn't quite as bulky and gets knocked out by just one Dual Wing Beat. Iron Hands is fourth and doesn't even attempt to fake us out before going down to Earthquake. The Fairy Type Flying-type Zacian is one of the most threatening Pokemon on Bruno's team, but it too falls to Earthquake just as Mega Lucario does. And with that, we've gotten our free matchups out of the way and are entering the Danger Zone. Agatha has a very offensive team full of glass cannons, and her lead Gengar is there to trick ya. This thing is actually a Zoroark. The dragon is not able to one-shot, so we set up the Dragon Dance since it forces the Gengar to go for Taunt. This basically gives us a free 33% boost to our attack, making Dragon Darts more than powerful enough to take this not-so Gengar out in one hit. Agatha then makes a mega blunder by sending in Gold Dengo, which does have a super effective move in Shadow Ball, but we don't have to care about that at all since we can simply go for Shadow Force and take Gold Dengo out without any trouble. Roaring Moon also has super effective stab, and with an attack boost from Photosynthesis, it's more than enough to take us out in one hit. But that's not something we have to care about if we just destroy the Lunatic in one turn. Marshadow is 4th and by far the most dangerous for Dragon. Even at +1, Dragon Darts is not even close to getting the one-hit KO. Marshadow just goes for Bulk Up, so I decide to stay in another turn, even though Shadow Sneak is a one-hit KO at this point because I still have that Focus Sash intact. However, I do end up getting the lowest roll and actually surviving with 2 HP. That's twice as good as Focus Sash, so I'll certainly take it. Second to last is Chi-Yu, so I go for a U-turn in order to swap into Roaring Moon. The Goldfish then goes for a resisted Dark Pulse, so I decide to do the same and go for a resisted Throat Chop, which doesn't quite get the KO. A burn from Flamethrower here would have probably lost me a Pokemon, but the reason I go for Throat Chop here is because I'm Choice Scarfed. Facing her final Pokemon Gengar, I want to already be swapped in and locked into Throat Chop to outspeed Gengar, taking it out in one hit to grant me a swift victory. We've made it to Lance, and it's time to decide who the best Dragon Trainer in Kanto actually is. My strategy in this fight was a bit of a gamble. The guy starts with Garchomp as I send in Dragon, which sees a kill through his Focus Sash with Dragon Darts. But the idea is actually to go for U-turn, since the AI is very likely to switch and send in Melmetal. Going for Dragon Darts would have been fine, but with this U-turn we gain a little bit of extra momentum that's really valuable. Melmetal is a very hard hitter, so the plan is to send in Shucka Berry Entei. The AI sees I have the berry and thus sees more damage with Double Iron Bash than Earthquake. This is huge since I can basically bait Melmetal into Burning Bulwark to get it burned. At this point, Melmetal basically can't hurt Entei, so I'm free to start setting up with Dragon Dance, but he ends up swapping to Salamence. This actually works out perfectly since I'm now faster than Salamence, and we end up neutralizing that Intimidate loss. We're even faster after it Mega Evolves, allowing us to connect with a Dragon Claw for over half damage. Salamence needs to be at +1 to see a KO, so it sets up with Dragon Dance, now making it faster. Now that it sees the KO with Double Edge, we can go for the Burning Bulwark to get it burned. This means no matter what Salamence does the following turn, we can't ever be taken out. And instead of just going for Dragon Claw for a quick KO, I end up setting up with Dragon Dance, allowing me to outspeed the next turn and giving me an extra boost. Iron Jugulus comes out 4th, but now that we're at +1 attack, we can easily knock it out with a Flare Blitz. Jugulus with Dark Hole is an absolute nightmare, so I'm glad we don't have to deal with it. As Lance sends in his signature Dragonite, I've gotta swap out, but he sees the KO with Earthquake, allowing me to get an Intimidate drop before dodging it with Flying. Dragonite oddly doesn't have any Dragon moves, so I can freely just set up a Dragon Dance here without fear of taking too much damage. Dragonite does the same, only getting up to neutral attack after Intimidate. I first go for a Crunch to break Multiscale to not activate its weakness policy. Then after tanking a dual Wing Beat, I finish the job with a Dragon Claw. This sends back in Melmetal, which at this range could actually take me out with a crit Ice Punch, so I swap out into Silvergate Bridge. Ice Punch activates Stamina, making Archaludon even more bulky than it needs to be. From there, I can easily take out the Nut Monster with a couple of Aura Spheres, sending in Lance's most deadly Pokemon. Primal Dialga is a big roadblock for us. With Roar of Time being super effective against most of my team, all I can do is send a Draco Meteor and pray. Because Archaludon has taken some damage, we won't be able to survive another one if we get swapped back in. Even so, Assault Vest does allow me to survive, and it swaps me into Entei. Gouging Fire obviously can't take a hit, so I swap out into Roaring Moon. Dialga's random move ends up being Flash Cannon, so at least I don't get immediately swapped out. Unfortunately, it does do just over half, so I try going for Roost as it goes for another one. The reason it goes for Flash Cannon instead of the super effective Roar of Time, which would blast me into oblivion, is because of a held Haban Berry. At this point, the only thing Roaring Moon can do is face the reality of its extinction, but before going down, we managed to do a little bit of damage with Dragon Claw. I knew there wouldn't be a way to get out of this fight without losing Pokemon, but Roaring Moon's sacrifice means Archaludon can finish the job with another Draco Meteor. And with Primal Primal Dialga defeated, Lance only has one Pokemon left, his lead Garchomp. Expecting it to want to knock me out with Earthquake, I swap into Dragon, who easily tanks the hit. And now that Lance has no other Pokemon to swap to, we can execute the first turn plan of taking out Garchomp with Dragon Darts. To my surprise, my dragons had managed to make it all the way to the final fight. So let's not let this run drag on and finish this now. Hornlad probably has the most terrifying team in the game, and with only 5 Pokemon to face it, I wasn't feeling too good about my chances, but I was gonna do my best. His lead Focus Sash Pheromosa with Triple Axle is a run killer, but because we went out of our way to get the Choice Scarf earlier, we're able to outspeed with Dragon and take it out with a couple of darts. Metagross comes in second, but we basically can't do anything locked into Dragon Darts, so I swap out into Entei. A Booster Energy gives me an attack boost as I swap in, and Metagross Mega Evolves. The most beautiful thing about this Mega Metagross is it only has attacking moves, and all of them make contact. Because of this, we can guarantee to get the burn with Bulwark the following turn, forcing Hornlad to swap out. As he sends in Eternatus, a better dragon than I could ever hope to have, I get a free Dragon Dance. And with the speed boost it provides, Entei is just about fast enough to outspeed Eternatus and take it out with a Dragon Claw. Yveltal comes in next, and we don't want to be associated with this thing whatsoever, so I immediately try to take it out with a Flare Blitz, but despite a +1 from Dragon Dance and the boost from Photosynthesis, I just barely fall short of the KO. Yveltal then connects with Dark Hole, possibly the single coolest animation in the entire game, instantly knocking out Entei, so I swap in Sharknado, who's just barely faster than Yveltal. I finish it off with a Dragon Claw, and Hornlad sends back in Metagross. Mega Metagross is faster than Garchomp, and I definitely want to keep that sash intact, so I swap out into Archaludon. Regiboy can tank hits from this thing for days, especially since it gains defense with every hit it takes. Archaludon is Specs, and unfortunately I don't have any good moves to hit Metagross with, so I lock myself into Flash Cannon, which is terrible when Hornlad swaps out into Miraidon. However, there isn't a way for Miraidon to one-shot Archaludon, so I'm expecting it to go for Calm Mind the next turn. With that in mind, after I land my Flash Cannon on the switch, I swap out into Sharknado. Calm Mind basically means this is a free switch, since we would be dead to Dragon Pulse anyway, and this keeps our sash intact. Miraidon then launches the Dragon Pulse, taking Sharknado down to 1 HP. But that's falling right into my trap, since I can now take Miraidon out with a Stab Earthquake. Now that some of the biggest threats on his team are out of the way, Hornlad sends back in Metagross. He knows he can outspeed and take me out with Bullet Punch, so I swap out into Drake to tank the hit. Intimidate is complete overkill here, since the burn makes Bullet Punch deal barely any damage at all as it is. By Mega Evolving, I could outspeed Metagross here, but I actually think that would work against me. Hornlad's final Pokemon is an Imposter Ditto, and if I can help it, I don't want to give him a Mega Salamence. On top of that, his Ditto is Choice Scarf, meaning even if I Mega Evolve now, I don't stand a chance of outspeeding it. However, the real issue is that Dragon Darts has a role that doesn't take Salamence out. So in order to work around this, I start by sending in Sharknado. There's no way Garchomp's gonna outspeed. He's here to do one thing, and that's take a hit. Because as Ditto eliminates Garchomp's final HP with a Dragon Claw, Rough Skin activates and puts it in range of the darts. With victory now within my grasp, all I have to do is press the button and sit back and watch. And of course, Dragon ends the fight in style with a critical hit dart, meaning that I just beat a Pokemon Radical Red Hardcore Nuzlocke using only Dragon types. And I think this run showcases dragons perfectly. Super janky and awful to use in the beginning, but slowly becoming almost broken towards the end. I had tons of fun using my favorite type to play through such a difficult game, and if you enjoyed the ride with me, maybe drop a like. I mostly did this challenge to get more used to this game's mechanics in preparation to try hardcore mode, so if that's something you want to see, subscribe.